Case File 1. The Man Who Spoke to Invisible People. The following case was documented and later archived. Here is what happened. The church first became aware of the man after several neighbors contacted the local parish priest about strange behavior they had been witnessing for weeks. At first, the reports sounded harmless. He kept to himself most of the time, but neighbors began noticing something unusual. Late at night, they could hear him talking. Not loudly, not angrily, just talking. The strange part was that he sounded like he was having full. But one evening, a woman who lived across the hallway passed his door while he was talking. She noticed something unsettling. There was no phone, and the conversation sounded very real. The man asked questions, then waited, then answered again, as if he were listening to someone that no one else could see. One of them contacted the local priest, asking if he could check on the man. The priest agreed and visited the apartment the next afternoon. When the man opened the door, he appeared calm and polite. Nothing about his appearance seemed unusual. He invited the priest inside and offered him a chair. Their conversation began normally. The priest asked how he had been feeling. "I'm not alone when I talk." The priest asked what he meant. The man answered calmly, "They're here sometimes." The priest asked who they were. The man shrugged slightly. "I don't know their names." The priest assumed at first that the man might be experiencing psychological distress. He suggested speaking with a counselor, but before leaving, the priest offered to say a short prayer. The man agreed. The priest began quietly. For the first few moments, nothing unusual happened. The priest stopped praying and asked who he was speaking to. The man looked confused. "You don't see them?" he asked. The priest gently told him no. The priest later wrote that the way the man said it was deeply unsettling. He didn't sound frightened. He sounded completely certain. Over the next several days, the priest visited again. Each time, the conversations with the invisible people continued. The pattern was always the same. The man would pause, tilt his head slightly, then answer questions no one else could hear. Sometimes the responses were short. Other times they sounded like full discussions. The priest began documenting everything. The answer surprised him. "They mostly watch," the man said, "but sometimes they ask questions." The priest asked, "What kind of questions?" The man replied quietly, "About prayer." This concerned the priest. The session took place inside a small chapel at the parish. Only essential clergy were present. The man sat calmly as the priest began a series of prayers. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened. Then suddenly, the man turned toward the empty aisle behind him again. He nodded, then whispered, "They don't like it in here." The priest continued praying steadily. As the prayer continued, the man's posture changed. The calm expression on his face slowly faded. He looked around the room nervously. "They're leaving," he said. The priest asked who was leaving. "The ones that talk," the man answered. "They don't want to stay." The session ended quietly. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Neighbors reported that the apartment was silent at night. When the priest visited again, the man seemed confused when asked about the voices. "I used to talk to someone," he said slowly, "but I can't remember who." Medical professionals continued observing him for several weeks. His condition stabilized. Whether the voices were psychological or spiritual, the response to prayer was undeniable. The final note read, "Conversation without visible speaker must always be investigated carefully." Case File 3. The Cleric Who Saw a Shadow. The following case was documented and later archived. Here is what happened. The church first became aware of this situation after a young cleric working at a small parish began reporting something he could not explain. The man had served at the church for several years. He was known to be disciplined, calm, and very careful with his duties. He assisted the parish priest during services, helped prepare the chapel each morning, and often stayed late to finish his work. Nothing about his behavior had ever raised concern. But one evening, while he was alone inside the church preparing the altar for the next morning's mass, something strange happened. He noticed a movement near the far wall of the chapel. At first, he assumed it was simply a shadow from the candles. Candlelight often causes shapes to move across walls and floors. But this shadow looked different. It seemed taller than anything in the room, and it moved slowly. Even though nothing else had changed, the cleric looked around the chapel. The candles were still. The windows were closed. Nothing appeared to be causing the movement. He stared at the wall for several seconds. Then the shadow disappeared. He assumed his eyes had simply adjusted to the dim light, so he finished his work and went home. The next evening, he stayed late again, and the same thing happened. This time, a shadow appeared near the doorway leading to the small hallway beside the chapel. It stretched along the wall for a moment, then slowly shifted. The cleric turned to see what might be casting it, but there was nothing there. No person, no movement. The hallway was empty. Once again, the shadow faded after several seconds. The cleric did not mention the incident to anyone at first. He believed there must be a simple explanation. Perhaps a passing car outside. Perhaps a reflection from a nearby building. But over the next week, the shadow appeared again and again. Always late at night. Always when he was alone in the chapel. Sometimes it appeared near the altar. Other times along the back wall. It never moved quickly. It simply appeared, shifted slightly, and vanished. After the fourth time, the cleric decided to speak with the parish priest. The priest listened carefully. He asked the cleric to describe exactly what he had seen. The cleric explained everything: the size of the shadow, the slow movement, the fact that nothing seemed to create it. The priest did not dismiss the story, but he also did not immediately assume anything supernatural. Church buildings can produce strange lighting effects, especially at night. Still, he agreed to stay late one evening to observe. That night, the two men prepared the chapel together. They spoke quietly while finishing their tasks. When everything was ready, they sat near the front pew and waited. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The chapel remained still. The candles flickered gently. Then suddenly, the cleric pointed toward the far wall. "There," he whispered. The priest looked. At first, he saw nothing. Then slowly, a long dark shape appeared along the wall beside the hallway. It was faint, but clearly visible. The priest stood up and walked toward it. The shadow shifted slightly as he moved. Then it faded. The priest checked the hallway. No one was there. The building was locked. The windows were closed. There was nothing that could easily explain what they had just seen. Over the next several nights, the priest and cleric continued observing. The shadow appeared 2 more times, always in the same general area, always when the chapel was quiet. And strangely, the shadow never appeared during daytime hours, only late at night. Eventually, the priest decided to perform a quiet blessing of the chapel. One evening after closing the church, he began a short prayer while walking slowly through the building. The cleric followed behind him. When they reached the hallway where the shadow usually appeared, the priest paused and continued the prayer calmly. The chapel remained silent. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then something unusual occurred. The cleric later said he felt the air in the hallway grow strangely heavy. The priest continued praying, and slowly, the shadow appeared again. But this time, it did not move. It remained still on the wall for several seconds. Then it faded completely. The two men waited, but it never appeared again. In the weeks that followed, the cleric continued working late in the chapel. The shadow never returned. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Whether the shadow came from natural cause or something unseen, its disappearance after prayer was carefully noted. The case file was sent to church archives and sealed." The final note read, "Not every sign brings explanation. but every observation must be recorded. Case File 2. The Girl Who Saw a Shadow. The following case was documented and later archived. Here is what happened. The church first became aware of the girl after her parents contacted their local parish priest about something they could not explain. At first, the problem sounded small. The girl was only 10 years old. She had always been quiet, thoughtful, and well-behaved. But over the course of several weeks, she began telling her parents that she kept seeing something in their house. She called it a shadow. At first, her parents assumed she was imagining things. Children often see shapes in the dark or mistake shadows for something else. But the girl insisted it was different. She said the shadow didn't move like normal shadows. It didn't appear only when the lights were on. Sometimes it appeared in the middle of the day. And most strange of all, it seemed to move on its own. The first time she told her parents about it, they comforted her and told her not to worry. But the stories kept coming. She said she saw the shadow near the hallway, sometimes near the stairs. Once she said she saw it standing beside her bedroom door. Her parents checked the house carefully. Nothing was there. They assumed she might be having nightmares. But one night, something happened that frightened them. The girl woke up suddenly and ran into her parents' bedroom. She was shaking. When they asked what was wrong, she said something strange. It followed me. Her parents asked what she meant. The shadow, she said quietly. They assumed she had simply been dreaming. But the next morning, she described something that unsettled them. She said the shadow had been standing beside her bed, not moving, just watching. After that night, the girl became afraid to sleep alone. She asked to keep the lights on. She avoided certain rooms in the house. Her parents tried to comfort her, but nothing seemed to calm her fears. Eventually, they decided to speak with their parish priest. The priest listened carefully as the parents explained what had been happening. He didn't dismiss the story, but he also didn't jump to conclusions. Children sometimes experience vivid fears, and many situations can be explained over time. Still, he agreed to visit the home and speak with the girl. When he arrived, she greeted him politely. At first, the conversation was normal. The priest asked about school, about her friends, about the things she enjoyed doing. Then he asked about the shadow. The girl became quiet. She pointed toward the hallway. "That's where it stands," she said. The priest looked. The hallway was empty. He asked her when she usually saw it. "Mostly at night," she said, "but sometimes during the day too." The priest asked what the shadow looked like. She thought for a moment. "It's tall," she said, "and it doesn't have a face." The priest continued asking gentle questions. The girl never sounded dramatic. She didn't seem like she was telling a ghost story. She sounded certain. Before leaving, the priest asked if he could say a short prayer with the family. They agreed. As he began the prayer, the girl suddenly looked toward the hallway again. Her eyes widened slightly. "It's there," she whispered. The priest turned. He saw nothing, but the girl stared at the same empty spot the entire time the prayer continued. After the prayer ended, she said something that made the room quiet. "It moved." The priest asked where. She pointed toward the kitchen. "He doesn't like when you pray." The priest didn't respond immediately. Instead, he wrote the statement down. Over the next several days, he returned to the house several times. Each visit followed the same pattern: conversation first, then prayer. And during prayer, the girl always looked toward the same areas of the house, sometimes the hallway, sometimes the stairs. Once she looked toward the ceiling and whispered, "It's watching again." After consulting with other clergy, the priest arranged for the family to spend time praying together daily. He also blessed the house quietly. Over the next few weeks, the girl's reports slowly began to change. At first, she said the shadow still appeared, but it seemed farther away, less clear. Then one evening, she told her parents something new. I don't see it anymore. The priest continued visiting for several weeks to be sure. The girl never mentioned the shadow again. Her sleep returned to normal. Her behavior returned to normal. And the house felt peaceful once more. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Whether the shadow was fear, imagination, or something unseen, its disappearance during prayer was noted carefully. The case file was sent to church archives and sealed." The final note read, "Not every presence leaves clear evidence, but every report must be taken seriously." Case File 4. The Minister Who Felt a Chill. The following case was documented and later archived. Here is what happened. The church first heard about the incident from a minister who had served quietly at a rural parish for many years. He was not someone who frightened easily. He had spent most of his life inside churches, chapels, and old buildings where silence and dim light were common. He was used to long nights preparing sermons, organizing records, and helping with late evening services. Nothing about the church building had ever bothered him. Until one winter evening, the minister had stayed late after a weekday service. Most of the congregation had already gone home. The church was quiet, and the lights were low. He was organizing books near the altar when he suddenly noticed something strange. A sudden chill passed through the room. At first he assumed it was just cold air. Old churches are known for drafts, especially in winter. But this chill felt different. It wasn't a breeze. It felt like a sudden drop in temperature that surrounded him for only a moment. Then it disappeared. The minister paused and looked around the chapel. The doors were closed. The windows were sealed. Nothing seemed out of place. He continued working and eventually left for the night. But the next evening, something similar happened again. This time, the chill came while he was walking through the narrow hallway behind the altar. The temperature dropped suddenly. The air felt colder around his arms and shoulders. And then, just as quickly as before, the sensation disappeared. The minister stopped walking. He touched the wall beside him. It felt normal. The hallway looked the same as it always had. He tried to ignore the experience. Old buildings can create strange drafts, especially after sunset. Still, the feeling stayed in his mind. Over the next several nights, the same thing continued to happen. Always in the same area. Always at roughly the same time. And always the same sudden chill. It would appear for only a few seconds, then fade away. The minister began paying closer attention. One evening he stood quietly in the hallway, waiting. The church was completely silent. The lights from the chapel barely reached the corridor. For several minutes nothing happened. Then suddenly the cold returned. It was stronger this time. The air around him felt several degrees colder. Not painfully cold, just unnatural. He later said it felt as if someone had opened a freezer door beside him. But again, there was no wind, no movement, nothing visible. The chill lasted for several seconds. Then it vanished. That was when the minister decided to speak with the parish priest. The priest listened carefully as the minister described what had been happening. He asked many questions. When did the chill occur? Where exactly in the building? Did anything else move or change? The minister answered honestly. Nothing else had happened. No sounds, no shadows, just the cold. One evening, the two men stayed late together. They walked through the church slowly, checking the doors and windows. Everything was closed. Everything was quiet. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual happened. Then suddenly the minister stopped walking. "Right here," he said softly. The priest felt it too. The temperature dropped quickly around them. The hallway air became noticeably colder. It lasted only a moment. Then the warmth returned. Neither man spoke for several seconds. The priest eventually suggested they say a short prayer. They stood quietly in the hallway and began. As the prayer continued, the air remained still. No chill returned. After the prayer ended, the priest continued walking through the building. blessing the chapel and the hallway. The minister followed behind him. From that night forward, the sudden cold never appeared again. The hallway felt normal. The church remained peaceful. The minister continued his duties for many years without experiencing anything similar. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Changes in atmosphere may occur naturally in old structures, but patterns that disappear during prayer must be recorded carefully. But every sign deserves attention." Case File 5, The Father Who Felt Pressure. The following case was documented and later archived. Here is what happened. The church first became aware of the situation after a parish priest known to most people simply as Father Daniel began reporting something he had never experienced before in all his years of ministry. Father Daniel had served the same small parish for more than 15 years. He was calm, disciplined, and known for rarely becoming unsettled by anything. Over the years, he had counseled grieving families, helped people through difficult situations, and even assisted during spiritual evaluations. Nothing about his work had ever frightened him. But one evening, something unusual happened inside the church. It was late. The evening mass had already ended, and most of the congregation had gone home. Father Daniel stayed behind, as he often did, to finish organizing the chapel and prepare notes for the next day's service. The church was quiet. Only a few candles were still burning near the altar. As he walked slowly down the aisle toward the front of the chapel, he suddenly felt something strange. A heavy pressure settled on his chest. Not pain, not shortness of breath, just a weight. As if something unseen had pushed against him for a moment. He stopped walking. The feeling lasted only a few seconds. Then it disappeared. At first, he assumed it was nothing serious. Perhaps fatigue. Perhaps stress after a long day. He continued his work and eventually went home. But the next evening, the same thing happened again. This time, the pressure appeared while he was standing near the confessional area of the church. Again it came suddenly. Again it lasted only a few seconds. And again it disappeared just as quickly. Father Daniel paused and placed a hand against the wooden wall beside him. Everything felt normal. The church was still. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, the experience stayed in his mind. Over the next week, the pressure returned several more times. Always inside the church. Always when he was alone. And strangely, it seemed to occur most often when he stood near a specific section of the chapel. The area near the back pews. After the fourth incident, Father Daniel decided to document what he was experiencing. He noted the time, the location, the exact sensation. He also checked his health carefully. Doctors examined him and found nothing wrong. His heart was healthy. His breathing was normal. There was no medical explanation for the sudden pressure. Because the experiences only happened inside the church, Father Daniel eventually spoke with another priest from the nearby parish. The priest listened carefully and agreed to visit the church one evening to observe. Together, they walked slowly through the building. The church was silent. The candles flickered gently near the altar. For nearly an hour, nothing unusual happened. Then suddenly Father Daniel stopped. "The pressure," he whispered. "It's happening now." The other priest watched him carefully. Father Daniel stood still, his hand resting lightly against his chest. The sensation lasted only a few seconds. Then it disappeared again. The second priest did not feel the pressure himself, but he noted the exact location where Father Daniel had been standing. It was the same place where the sensation had occurred before. The two men decided to say a prayer together. They stood quietly in the chapel and began. The prayer was calm and steady. Nothing unusual happened while they prayed, but something interesting occurred afterward. In the days that followed, Father Daniel returned to the same place in the chapel several times. The pressure never returned. Not once. The area felt completely normal. Weeks passed, then months. The strange sensation never happened again. Father Daniel continued serving the parish as he always had. The church remained peaceful. In his final report, the assisting priest wrote, "Whether the pressure was physical, emotional, or something less easily explained, its disappearance after prayer was carefully recorded. The case file was sent to church archives and sealed." The final note read, "Unusual sensations in sacred spaces must always be documented, even when their cause remains unknown. As an Amazon associate, I earn from qualifying purchases. Want to go deeper? These are real paranormal and horror books that explore cases similar to the story in this video, including hauntings, encounters, and investigator reports.